Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.
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 Welcome to the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast with me, Dr. Janine Anderson. Heads up, this show may contain adult language and may mention specific foods. If you find either of those to be too triggering, I trust you to take care of yourself and do what you need to do. This podcast is sponsored by Ipono Maui and ME.d Care. Ipono Maui is led by internationally renowned expert on eating disorders, Dr. Anita Johnston. Located in a home-like oceanfront facility in beautiful Maui, Hawaii, Ipono offers residential, partial hospitalization, and intensive outpatient treatment for eating disorders. Visit iponomaui.com, spelled AIPONOMAUI, to learn more. ME.d Care has provided PHP, IOP, and outpatient treatment for all genders 18 and over since 2001. CAMSA, which stands for Connection, Acceptance, Mindfulness, Sense of Self, and Action, is ME.d Care's mindfulness-based treatment approach and is incorporated into each individualized treatment plan. Facilities are located in Denver, Colorado Springs, and Kansas City, and all treatment is supported by master's-level clinicians or higher. ME.d Care offers 4 specialty tracks for binge eating disorder, elite athletes, substance use, and trauma. And the Connections House, an affordable supportive housing component, adds an extra layer of supervised support. Visit eatingdisorder.care or call 866-771-0861. Hello, friends. It's good to be back with you again, the beginning of Season 3 of the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast. It's been so wonderful to have a little break and to be able to come back. I am so excited for this season. I know I've mentioned this to y'all before, but the guests on this season I'm so honored to have and continue to be extremely, extremely grateful for all of you and your emails and staying in touch. So always feel like you can email me at podcast@eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com. Y'all have been sending me just really cool ideas about future topics for episodes and people you want to hear from, and I always appreciate that. Also, I will keep you posted as this season goes along with updates and announcements about the book release. Again, if you want to be updated about that, get on my mailing list. I really don't send out very many emails. I probably send out maybe 1 a quarter. So it's not an email list that you would get on where you're just going to be inundated with emails. If you want to join, go to eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com. There will be a pop-up where you can sign up, or you can email me directly and then ask me to add you manually to that list. Either way is just fine. Getting into our episode for today, I am thrilled to have Carolyn Costin here to talk with us about being a recovered clinician, the recovery process, and just about her and her journey. So the way I record these is I record the interview with a guest separately, and then I go back and I record their bio and all their credentials and stuff by myself, because when I do it in front of people, I mess it up. I get really nervous. I'm sure you guys noticed that on some previous episodes. So when I was telling Carolyn this when we were recording, she told me, no, don't read my bio. That's so boring. I don't want you to do that. I want you to just talk about what I mean to you or how I've influenced you. Instead, say something interesting. So with all due respect to the lovely Carolyn Costin, I'm not doing that. I'll do both. So I'm going to read her official bio, and then also I'll just talk a little bit about what her career has meant to me. So Carolyn Costin, ME.d, LMFT, CEDS, is a world-renowned eating disorder clinician, author, and speaker and consultant. Recovered from anorexia, Carolyn became a teacher and psychotherapist. After successfully treating her first eating disorder client, she recognized her calling. In 1996, Carolyn founded Montanito, the first residential eating disorder treatment program, and served as clinical director until 2016. Carolyn remains active in the field with her private practice, lecturing, teaching, supervising, and serving on boards of professional organizations. In 2017, Carolyn founded the Carolyn Costin Institute, which offers continuing education and training for clinicians, coaches, mentors, and others. And of course, I will link that in the show notes, if you are interested in getting in touch with Carolyn or doing some training with her through the Carolyn Costin Institute. Carolyn Costin is a huge role model to all of us in the field and to anybody who's ever had to recover. She's amazing. She's known as being incredibly intuitive and wise, very, very clinically sharp. Also a very sweet, completely humble, unassuming person who's just so relatable and so easily accessible. And you all will easily pick up on that when you hear her talking. So I think for many of us in the field, Carolyn Costin is absolutely a hero. She's written numerous books about how to recover, and I've read most of those and have helped me through my recovery journey, and she's definitely an example and someone I look up to as a recovered clinician myself. So without any further ado, here's Carolyn Costin.
Welcome, Carolyn. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm very excited about it.
I'm very excited to talk to you. I just told you off of the recording that you're one of my personal and professional heroes, so it's really wonderful. I'm so grateful and humbled to have you here today, and I'm sure a lot of other people are really excited to hear you talk as well, because I know that a lot of people feel that way about you.
Well, that's so nice. I mean, it really is. I appreciate it a lot, and I hope whatever it is I say can be helpful.
Oh, it definitely will be. So just to give our listeners a little bit of background, in case they don't know about your professional background, tell us a little bit about that, and we'll get into more personal stuff and recovery in just a few.
Well, professionally, I guess I should say I became an eating disorders therapist so long ago, it sort of freaks me out to say. You know, it was in 1979 I got my license as a therapist, so that's a long time ago, and I was an intern before that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I never thought I would treat people for eating disorders, but, you know, I mean, back then, I think I'd met one other person who had an eating disorder. So I was a high school teacher and counselor first, and then I decided to go into private practice. And it was interesting because someone referred someone to me, and they said, oh, she has that thing you had, which was very odd, you know. And so I treated this girl, and she got better, and it was so weird. Then someone else had bulimia, and they were referred to me, and all of a sudden I started making a name for myself, and here it is, late 70s, and then it becomes early 80s, and before Karen Carpenter died from anorexia, and before it really was on the map, you know, before eating disorders were on the map.
Yeah.
So then I was in private practice for about 15 years, and during that time, I opened and ran hospital units because I was trying to find, for people who weren't getting better, I thought there's got to be, you know, something else, and I started looking at hospital programs and ended up running hospital programs, and then I thought, oh no, this isn't working. They need to be in a home, and they need to be able to cook and deal with food and go grocery shopping and all the things that I saw people leaving hospital programs and relapsing is because they really weren't hands-on, you know, with the food and making food and shopping for food. So no wonder everybody was relapsing. And that ultimately led to me opening ME.d, which I had for 20 years, and sold ME.d about a year and a half ago due to a variety of circumstances. And now I run the Carolyn Costin Institute, where I train therapists, and I'm training people to be eating disorder coaches. So that's a quick run-through of my life.
A quick run-through of your amazing, long, prestigious career, for sure. And just to provide a little bit of background, you know, we're fortunate nowadays to have so many more treatment options for higher level of care for people. But when you started ME.d, the idea of residential treatment was absolutely revolutionary, hadn't been done before.
That's right. There were no residential programs in a home like that, and so the licensing was really strange. They licensed me as an old age home because they couldn't figure out what else to do with me.
Oh my gosh.
And over the years that changed to Department of Health. But and I did a lot of things that I think people at the time thought were kind of woo-woo California. Like I taught yoga and meditation, all things that we know now are actually very important. My recent book on yoga and eating disorders has a lot of information on how that practice and the philosophy of yoga is all about mind-body connection, mind-body spirit, And that's the thing that's so broken in people with eating disorders. And meditation that helps calm the amygdala, which we know so many people with eating disorders, around 80%, especially anorexia and bulimia, end up diagnosed with anxiety disorders. And here we have this meditation practice. So all the things that I was doing that I instinctually sort of knew were helpful and helped me, and I feel kind of vindicated that all this research is coming out, Those are actually not woo-woo things. They're actually really solid, important things to do.
Right. It's wonderful that it's come around and you intuitively knew that, and then it's got to be nice to have the research back you up on it as well.
Well, this is what I think about using recovered people. I mean, I did that based on things I knew, and I don't think just because you're recovered you have the skill to treat people, but I think we've done a disservice for a long time. I just started saying I was recovered and talking about it, but so many people over the years, especially in the beginning, tried to quiet me and say, you shouldn't self-disclose that. And I mean, it's been an uphill battle, but I just kept on going because it was the truth, and I wasn't ashamed of it. And I think now there's going to be there's a tipping point where there's so many recovered people in the field, and I think we're learning how they can give back.
Yeah, I just love to dive deeper into all the different aspects of what you said with that. Certainly my experience so far, I'm over 10 years recovered. I think it'll be 12 in the fall, and am a licensed psychologist and a CEDS now, and have the podcast and have a little outpatient treatment center in Denver. And I definitely still get that feedback from professionals like, oh my gosh, you self-disclose that you're recovered yourself. Like, doesn't that harm people? Doesn't that damage relationships with clients? Like, what if you didn't want one of your clients in private practice to know? And I've never understood that perspective. It seems absurd to me. Of course, I want for people to know it's a huge chunk of who I am and what I do. And there's nothing negative about it to me. I would love to hear more about your experience of that.
Well, it's so strange. And to me, it's so strange that, 35, whatever, some years later, 38 years later, we're still dealing with this issue. I'm so surprised, but I do have some understanding about the reasons for it. For example, I think legitimately people are concerned that, well, what happens if you relapse? You're treating somebody and you relapse, and how would that affect your clients and things like that. But I think, wow, there's a lot of therapists out there who have had depression or anxiety disorder or OCD or whatever, or gotten a divorce, and they treat couples who, who are having marriage problems, or the people who have depression have treated people with depression. I think it's very strange that so much focus is on, if you had an eating disorder. I also think there's a problem in terms of, like, if you have a drug or an alcohol problem and you work in a chemical dependency treatment place, they can do a drug screen, and they can find out if you're not sober anymore, because they can test you. There's no test they can give people to see if you're in your eating disorder or not. So I think in some ways people have been insecure about that. Mm-hmm. But I really fundamentally don't understand, because if those things happen, they happen, and you deal with it and your clients deal with it. I think it's really, I'm trying to get a handle on why it's been such an interesting thing, and why people would say, you shouldn't tell your clients about it. That makes me feel like people think that it's shameful, and I think, really, do we want to reflect that to our clients, that they should be ashamed that they had an eating disorder? So I really feel strongly about it, and even more so now, because I feel like there's so many people who are in the field. Some research shows that up to 50% in some surveys of people who are in the eating disorder field have had an eating disorder. Now, I don't know if it's that much. There's different research samples, but I think the tipping point has come where there's enough that we can't be dismissed,
Right.
And I do feel like people like yourself have come up to me or written me and said, thank you for paving the way and how brave you were. And
absolutely.
It's funny because I don't really remember feeling that brave. I think I didn't really know in the beginning when I started saying it. I didn't really know I wasn't supposed to. So I found out, I guess. And after that, I guess you didn't call it being brave. But I think we're going to change the field. I think that people who are recovered have so much to give back. And it's not like I think other therapists who haven't had a history of an eating disorder aren't good. Some of the best therapists I ever had at Montanito never had an eating disorder. But I think if you have had one, you have a lot to share and a lot to offer as a role model that people truly can be recovered from this and not always recovering, which is my other pet peeve, that eating disorders got put into this box like chemical dependency that you'll always be recovering, and I just don't believe that.
Yeah, so let's go to, because we'll definitely talk about recovered versus recovering, or recovered and recovering, and the language and why you talk about it the way you do. But first, tell me a little bit about why to you it's so important to have recovered people involved in the field, either formally or informally helping people who are working on their recovery.
Well, the foremost thing, I think, is to be role models, to show people who can do it. I mean, my first international talk, where was about 30 years ago, where I stood up and I said this, I'm recovered, and I had about 5 recovered patients with me, and they had all been recovered for a few years. People came up to me and said, therapists, doctors said, oh, I've been treating eating disorders for a while, and I've never seen anybody who's recovered. So that still goes on today. I still meet people today who said, no, anybody's recovered. It's astonishing to me, but that is, imagine being a doctor or something where you, or a therapist, and you're treating something and you've never seen anybody be recovered. So I think that having people who are recovered who say, not just a year or 2 years, but people say, I'm 10 years, I'm 12 years, I'm 15 years, I'm 30 years, recovered, that means something. And I think we're at that place in the field now where people can actually really say it and people believe it and see it. So I think role modeling is one thing. I also think that there's a way that people who are recovered, a lot of times people with eating disorders say, you just don't get it, you just don't understand. And it is a little bit hard for people to understand why people do this to themselves, right? And I think people who've had eating disorders, the people who are struggling can't really get away with saying that. You don't understand, or you haven't been there. So I think people who are recovered are in a position, and I've seen this at Montanito and in my private practice, where people who are recovered have a way that they can sort of also challenge people and get away with the challenges a little bit more than other therapists or other people who haven't been there. So when the person says, I just can't do that, we can say, oh yeah, I thought that too. I thought I was never going to stop counting calories. I thought I was never going to stop the automatic, like it becomes almost this habitual automatic thing to purge your food when you eat something. They become tied so closely together. And the person says, I'm not in control of it. It just happened. I'm not going to be able to stop it. And people who are recovered can say, yep, I felt exactly like that, and I haven't done it for 10 years. Things like that, I think, are irreplaceable,
Right. So powerful. And like you noted earlier, of course, there are amazing clinicians who have not had their own recovery history. Like, for example, the person that I always think of is Dr. Anita Johnston. She never had an eating disorder. She's obviously brilliant. Exactly. And I would totally send anybody in the world to her. And I do think that there's unique things that people who are recovered get to offer to people who are working on that recovery. I'm wondering if you'll tell us a little bit about your own recovery from an eating disorder. And I know that that's a big question, but maybe starting with kind of how you knew you needed to recover, how you knew you needed help.
Well, it's so interesting because the first time because there weren't treatment centers around and because people didn't even know what I had, the first counselor I went to see at the university I was going to, had no idea what was wrong with me. And of course, neither did I, but I said, I feel really guilty when I eat. But she didn't have any idea what to do. And there was one point when I got on the scale, I just realized that I had lost weight. I felt really good about it, and I was really afraid to gain it back. And so in my fear of not wanting to gain it all back, I kept losing. I didn't mean to keep losing, but I kept losing. Mm-hmm. And then every time you get to this new low, that becomes your now that's my weight. Now I don't want to go above that sort of. But I remember getting on the scale at one point and going, okay, I'm not in control of this anymore. It's in control of me. That was probably the first realization that I had that I needed to get help. But the reality is the people that I the counselor there, and then I went and saw a psychiatrist back in Los Angeles when I got home, and also had no idea what to do. And so I ultimately, that was it for my treatment, and I ultimately got better reading about nutrition, and studying psychology, and I became very interested in spiritual things, like, I don't even know how to describe it, but sort of care of the soul kind of things. And I think all these things combined really helped me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so then eventually you got to a point, like, how did you feel like you finally had reached a point where you could say, I'm recovered?
That's a weird one, because I think that, I mean, for a long time, I just felt like, oh, I'm getting better, and I'm healthier, and I'm able to eat freely. I can go out with friends and not freak out, and I've gained weight, and all that, got my period back, all that. But I think what happens is there's not any time sort of when you wake up and say, like, it's like having a broken bone. It's not broken one day, and then the next day you wake up and it's completely healed and this bone has recovered from the injury. It's a slow process, and you get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And at first you're able to walk on it, put some pressure on it, take the cast off, whatever, and then eventually you're running on it and playing basketball again. And I think you look back and say, wow, I haven't had any pain, I haven't had to ice it, I haven't had to, and it was sort of like that. Looking back and saying, wow, I'm not scouring menus looking for the calories. I'm not freaking out and having to go exercise to burn the calories off when I'm eating. I'm not weighing myself. All those things, and you say, and it sort of becomes a thing where you are living your life and you look back and you say, wow, those things are gone. That's kind of how it was, and I feel like in all these years that I've been seeing people, it's the same thing. Nobody is like, oh, today I am recovered, but they start feeling stronger and stronger, and at some point just feel like, oh, it's just not there. I don't have the desire anymore. It doesn't cross my mind. And I tell people this because there's a phase in treatment, I think, where you're not engaging in the symptoms anymore, but you still think about it all the time.
Right.
Or you hate your body, or you feel triggered. And a lot of times clients feel like, oh, if this is what being recovered is, I can't deal with it, because every day I'm trying to resist the impulse. Every day I cry about hating my body, and they think, if that's what being recovered is, no thanks,
Sure.
And so it's very important to tell people, no, you're not recovered yet. This is just a phase. You're symptom-free, but you still have all the thoughts. It's pretty soon, those will go too. If you're not, quote, feeding the eating disorder, those will go. And eventually, it won't cross your mind to take care of any of your problems or your concerns or even body image stuff. It doesn't cross your mind to do it with eating disorder behaviors.
Right. I'm so glad that you said that. That's, first of all, that's a great example with the broken bone. I think that that's just perfect. But also letting people know that if you're in that phase where you've discontinued using behaviors, but you're still really having all those eating disorder thoughts raging, that definitely passes. And I absolutely agree with you. I believe that those thoughts go away. I mean, I don't have eating disorder thoughts. I don't have body hatred thoughts, that sort of thing. So I think all of that really does go away. I'm curious to hear how you came to this position, which you're very well known for. And I'm very grateful that you're so outspoken about it, that people can become recovered, that we're not always in recovery, like that there is a point.
Well, I think that it is, you're very disordered at one point in your life, and then you can get to being recovered. And like you just said, you don't have the thoughts anymore. You're not only not engaging in the symptoms, but you don't have the thoughts and you don't have the desire. And recovering is this interesting term, started being used a lot in chemical dependency, because they believe that there's something in people who have chemical dependency. Their biology is so different that if they have a drink, for example, even if they've been sober for 10 years, then chemically it's going to affect their brain and they're going to go off the wagon and they're going to become alcoholics. So it's one day at a time. And people have to admit they're powerless over alcohol and all that. When I first started looking at that, when I was treating people early on, the first thing that kind of bothered me was I had these clients coming to see me and doing this thing where they said, oh, I'm in OA, and, I asked them about it, and they showed me the steps, and, well, the first one, I admit I'm powerless over food. And I thought, well, that's not right. How could you be powerless over food? Here's food, here's you. There were so many things about it that concerned me, and I can never eat sugar or white flour again because I'll go off into this binging mode. But then they were binging on potato chips, and roast beef and stuff like that, so it didn't even make sense.
As a side note, that's why we don't recommend OA.
Yeah. So why would anyone want to tell me, and I've had people tell me, well, how do you know you're recovered, You could slip up tomorrow, I went, well, okay, it's been how many years, 40-some years now,
You're probably good.
And there have been people who said, oh, I thought I was recovered and 10 years in and then I relapsed. It's not that I don't think people could relapse. I think they can. But
right.
I would say that every person who has come to me and said, I was recovered once and I relapsed, when I get into it and start doing therapy with them, and there's plenty of those people who have come to Montanito and said, oh, I was recovered for 2 years or 3 years, and then it's my own experiences. Those are people who stopped the symptoms, never did the underlying work. They never really were able to figure out and resolve what led to the eating disorder in the first place and how to prevent themselves, and what are the tools that they use now when they get upset or depressed or anxious. What do they use, and do they know themselves well enough? Have they figured out ways to deal with their emotions or their anxiety? And always I find that answer is no. So that's my take on that part of it. And I feel troubled by people who still want to say you're always recovering. Now, the genetics people, and there's a lot of research on how people are different. People with eating disorders, there's some serotonin differences, there's some dopamine differences and things like that. Even so, I feel like, okay, but my genes haven't changed and my serotonin, dopamine, whatever hasn't changed. So what is it that makes it so that I had an eating disorder and now I don't? And I think you learn to deal with those. You learn to deal with your own genetic makeup, and it can manifest itself as an eating disorder, but I don't think that means, oh yeah, now you always have to be recovering and you always have to be on guard and you can't ever say you're recovered. I just don't, that's not the way I think.
Yeah, I don't buy into that either. I mean, I think definitely if you have done that good, deep work on what caused your eating disorder to form and what kept it going, and you kind of know what to look out for in the future and you have other tools to deal with it. And particularly in your recovery work, if you have completely let go of the diet mentality and dieting, that really helps to create lasting recovery.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I agree with that. And I don't think that people, like I said before, I don't think that means that people can't, well, I think sometimes that people get better and can stay better without doing all this underlying work. I don't go digging under rocks with people. I think a lot of times people get better without fully understanding all the reasons that cause their illness. And some of them go on, I'm one of them, and to be recovered for the rest of their life. I mean, I got better before I really understood all the reasons why I got sick. And now we know so much more about, my temperament helped lead to that, and different things and stressors, and my dad marrying a fashion model, that might have a little bit to do with it. There were things that had to do with it that I found out later. So I don't want to imply that everybody has to do all this underlying deep work. Sometimes people get better without doing that. But when a person is continually slipping up or relapsing or unable to get better, then I think you better go deeper, because there are things that, in this particular case, if they're not resolved, then you're not going to be recovered and stay recovered.
And that's a great point. Tell us a little bit about the ideas of the healthy self and the eating disorder self, because you talk about this a lot.
Well, again, I think that everybody is born like this is the thing about disordered and recovered. I think people are born with their personalities, whatever, and their temperament, and they're not yet tainted by the culture or the anxiety manifesting or whatever. And so you have this human being who is born with this healthy, strong, and sometimes I even say soul self. Over time, this other part of self develops. And it's really important, I think, really important, because I think I first came to this concept, I've talked about this so many times. I was in college and I was driving to a Christmas party, and I started having this conversation with myself. You know, when you get to the party, you're not going to eat any of the cookies there, you know, you're going to be really strong. And then this other voice, you know, said, well, you know, you could have some. What would show that you're stronger is being able to have some and just not have to eat all of them. You know, you can control yourself. And then the eating disorder voice came back and said, you're just trying to allow yourself to eat, you know, you'll get fat. And I started having this dialogue in my head. And sort of, you know, when I talk to people, you know, so years later when I'm treating people, I realized everyone who came to see me had this healthy self in there that I could actually get in touch with and talk to. And that healthy self, for example, wouldn't feed their best friend the way they were feeding themselves. They wouldn't, if they were taking care, babysitting a young kid, they wouldn't tell them the things they were telling themselves. So it was in there. They just weren't applying it to themselves anymore. And the way that eating disorder self grew is you go on a diet and then you get really conditioned and you sort of brainwash yourself, oh, these foods are fattening, and pretty soon it's not just certain foods are fattening, but all food becomes fattening, you know?
Right.
And so you eat less and less and less. Then you might get habituated to purging after you eat things. And we know now with neuroscience that you pair two things together, like every time I eat ice cream, I purge. Pretty soon it's automatic. Eat ice cream, I have to purge. So this whole other personality, kind of this more of an ego state, develops, has its own thoughts and ways of behaving. But when you talk to the person's healthy self, when you say, but wait a second, what would you tell somebody else in this position? Or what would you can see that it's so fascinating to me. It's in there. They're just not applying it to themselves. So I've always felt my role is to strengthen that healthy self, because if you just try to put controls on the eating disorder self, you can do that. I could bring people into Montanito and keep them in treatment and, you know, get weight on them. But if I didn't strengthen their healthy self, then when they left treatment, the eating disorder part of them would just take back over, run the show. It was the stronger ego state, and they would be fully in relapse. So my goal was always, I'm not here to take away your eating disorder self. I'm here to take away your eating disorder behaviors, but your eating disorder self will be integrated back into your healthy self, and your healthy self will know what to do. And the eating disorder self just is the part of them that needed it in the first place. It's sort of the alarm signal, you know what I mean? It's like the thing that says you need to pay attention to this, or you're sad, or you're frustrated, or you need some help or whatever. It becomes the part of you. You realize, oh, that's the part of me that lets me know I have a problem. But I don't have to use eating disorder behaviors to deal with it, because I have this strong other healthy core self inside that has now learned how to take care of myself. So I always talk to people with the idea that I'm not here to take anything away. I'm going to strengthen your healthy self, and that part of you is going to be the healing. And that's always true, and I think people feel relieved by it. Otherwise, you get into a power struggle. If you just immediately try to go and take something away with this person, we don't have eating disorders for stupid reasons. We have them because they're doing something for us. And so there's always, if you go and start to just grab it away from the person, they grab back, and now you're in this tug of war. So I just let go and say, I'm not going to do that, but let me strengthen your healthy self, because you'll take care of you. And I have a really good track record. Really, Montanito's outcome studies are good, and when I opened residential, I was so successful in my private practice. I thought, I know how to do this, you know? Right.
Yeah, that's a good approach.
So I think it works, and I think writing the 8 Keys was really interesting because I didn't even want to write that book at first because I thought, self-help for eating disorders, I don't know. And Norton really pushed me to write it. And
it helped me so much.
Well, thank you. I mean, I have so many people all over the world writing me about how much it helps them. And I think part of it is giving them those assignments for how to deal with their two parts of self. But I think also having written it with a former client who recovered and became a therapist, and we quote a lot of recovered people in there, I think it's a hopeful book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also an accompanying workbook for it too, the 8 Keys to Recovery workbook as well. In case anybody out there is...
it's pretty new.
Yeah, in case anybody out there is looking for that. I think workbooks are really helpful. I think it's nice to have a little bit of structure if that's something that you like to just bring into therapy with you. Wondering if maybe there are a couple of the 8 keys that you want to share with the listeners and expand a little more on.
Yeah, well, the second one is the one that you asked me about, the healthy self versus eating disorder self. Mm-hmm. And that's probably if I could only teach one thing, it would be that, and that's key too. But I think there's a couple other ones that, they're all important because, it was so funny. They said, will you write this book? And I went, 8? How come you're only giving me 8? There's so many more. But when I got down to it, I know, it's funny. They have a series, though, of 8 keys, so it had to be that. But when I got down to it, I put things and sort of squashed them into these keys, and it actually sort of works. But I would say the one about reaching out, key number 7, getting people to reach out to others, because what ultimately happens when you have an eating disorder, it's not like you go drinking with your buddies when you have chemical dependency. You're so alone in it.
Right.
And getting people to reach out when they first start to feel upset, or when they first get the idea, I'm going to go binge, or I'm going to go run 12 miles, or I'm going to go take laxatives, if you can get people to start reaching out to people rather than their behaviors, it changes everything. It changes everything. And they don't want to do it. And that key 7, goes through an entire list asking the questions of what gets in the way of you reaching out. And, people will say all kinds of things. I'm embarrassed. People haven't really known how to respond to me. I don't know what to say. I'm not sure I want to be stopped. And in that book, we counteract all those reasons and really call on people to just try it because it's a game changer. So that's the other one I would say. And then I guess key 4 talks a lot about how, you have to challenge your thoughts, but you have to learn how to feel your feelings. Like really feel them and be able to cry and stomp your feet if you need to, but also separate yourself and know that you're not your thoughts and feelings. And this is a very Buddhist spiritual practice, that being able to sit, that's why meditation helps so much, being able to sit and recognize my feelings come and go. I don't have to immediately act on them. A lot of people over time, the eating disorder has numbed their feelings. They try to use the behaviors to numb feelings, but then it just gets to a point where they're not used to feeling their feelings, and when they stop the behaviors and the feelings start to come up, they don't even know how to deal with them. So I guess that is a really important key to me. But, but of course, key 5 is, you have to deal with the food. So they're all pretty critical.
Yeah, we can't cross any off of that list, but certainly those ones sound really important. And I know definitely people from the podcast who write me or clients I work with in private practice, I think especially the openness to feeling your feelings, not liking your feelings, but openness to them can just be really, really tricky. And I know I've definitely had people ask, can I just recover without the feelings? And I'm like, no, I'm so sorry, but you can't.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You got to do that.
People say, I don't know what I'm feeling. And I say, well, if you stop your behavior, if you really feel like purging and you stop yourself from doing it, believe me, feelings will come up. If you don't know what you're feeling, try interrupting your behaviors and feelings will come up. And even if you don't know what they are in terms of identifying a name for them, it doesn't really matter. Say what you're feeling in your body, Describe it in your body, which is another thing I teach people, how to feel their feelings in their body rather than calling their feelings something, naming it, giving a word to it. What's that feel like in your body. And once you start paying attention to that, you can help transform it, identifying it, talking about it. There's a whole thing called name it to tame it, which people don't really understand, but it means that when you start identifying, talking about something, you actually, the amygdala is the part of our brain that stores emotions and emotional memory, and it can get away with itself, And in fact, people with anorexia nervosa, it looks like have hyperactive amygdalas. At least there's some initial research on that. Maybe people with bulimia, but sure, people with anorexia nervosa, it looks like. And so anyway, you have this heightened emotional response. And it turns out that talking about it calms the amygdala down. That's a very important thing to tell people who say, how is talking about this in therapy going to help me? Well, guess what? It actually tames, that's why they call name it to tame it. It tames that emotional part of your brain that can go off and go haywire and kind of run amok,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another important thing to really keep in mind too is that emotional literacy and being able to feel and experience those feelings is a skill, which means that it can be practiced and learned, and that it gets easier the more that you do it as well. So I always make sure to tell people
Absolutely.
it's not always going to be so hard.
Yeah, and I think people often think, I just don't have that. It's like, no, you can train yourself to have it like anything. It's like saying, I just don't know how to spell. I was born without that ability. Well, yeah, we all were.
But we all figured it out somehow.
I think it's great that you said that, because sometimes we just don't learn that. And sometimes some parents are better at modeling that than others. Some parents are better at teaching that than others. So absolutely, we can learn these kind of skills.
Mm-hmm. What are some words of wisdom that you have from your many years of personal experience and professional experience for people right now who are going to listen to this podcast and they're just in the thick of it, like really slugging it out with their eating disorder?
Well, I think it's super important to tell people that finding someone you can tell the truth to, because I really think I have found that people spend years going to therapists and doing things and not ever really telling the truth because they're afraid. They're afraid of the consequences. They're afraid of what people will think of them. And I would say then search and find someone you trust that you can tell the truth to, because it is very difficult. I understand why you lie. I lied. In fact, I run a group. I used to run a group at Montego called Why We Lie.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's really pretty cool. And I bring in family members and have family members sit in the outside circle and the client sit in the inside circle and talk about, and then I'd have the family members. You can ask a question of anybody in the circle except for your own son or daughter, You have to ask it of, anyway, it's so interesting. But finding someone that you can tell the truth to, because I think when people tell me they feel hopeless, I have always discovered, people who say I just feel hopeless, I've always discovered that, and this is so funny, and it's been true every time, and I can't say it's true for everybody, but I can say in my experience it's been true, that they have been unable to tell the truth about something. They have been unable to talk about something, unable to reveal exactly what's going on, when it's going on to people. Always, every person who's ever come to me and been hopeless, I have discovered that they're holding back something. Sometimes they're holding back something that they don't quite know. Like there's something that happened to them and they have a sense, but they don't quite know. So sometimes it's not intentional withholding, but most of the time it's that they have been unable to find somebody they could tell the truth to. So that's kind of fascinating to me. So I would say that. And I would say that also in my experience, the people who don't get better are people that give up. They stop trying. They feel like it's not going to happen for them, and so they sort of throw in the towel. And I have always seen that, because I've seen people who have had an eating disorder for 40 years who I treated who are totally recovered today. So I don't believe that there's a certain amount of time or years or severity. I saw someone who had 21 suicide attempts and had a history of trauma, had a history of drug and alcohol abuse, bulimia, totally recovered today. So I don't let people tell you that you can't do it or You just have to, I always believe that everybody has the potential to be recovered. I'm not a fool, and I understand that not everybody will become recovered, because I have known people who have died from this illness. So I don't have my head in the sand, but I think everybody has the potential to be recovered, because I've never found any ingredient that says, oh yeah, this person's not going to be.
Right.
If I've seen people that I just described who are recovered, then I don't rule it out for anybody.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and say the same on all those same points too. And that I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but now there's, research coming out to support too, that maybe when we're looking at who recovers and how long that takes, that our research in the past hasn't had a long enough time frame on there to really gauge it. And then if we look at outcome 10 years or more, even, it brings even more support to the idea that people get better.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I have been very disturbed by some reports of colleagues, I won't even say who, but, saying, if you don't get better after a certain amount of time, you're not going to get better. And I would say that's really, really bad to put that data out, because it's totally not true. In fact, I didn't even fit into their time frame,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen so many people. In fact, the people at Montanito, I saw so many people who had an average of 3 prior treatments and had their eating disorder on an average of about 7 to 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the outcome study was in the 80% percentiles for the first 10 years that we were open, that we compiled all the data for. And the data was, we followed them 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 18 months, 2 years, and every year for 10 years.
Wow.
We're still following them. So it was very, and the data was, people did their surveys and sent them in anonymously. So they had to go and get weighed by an outside practitioner, who then sent us the weight on a separate card, so they wouldn't just be reporting their weight. We really had some controls over that research, and I was really proud of it. And it means that all the little things that came together that we did really did work. And I can't isolate any one,
Mm-hmm.
but with people who had been to previous treatments and had their eating disorder for that long, to have that high of outcome, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's amazing. I also have gotten a lot of emails from people who are recovered and are either professionals working in the field now, or they're working to become an eating disorder specialist. What wisdom would you impart to them?
Well, now I think is a good time. I think it's a good time in the history of the field, and I would hope that one of the things that I've done, and it's sort of, I was trying to find my place where I was going to land after Montanito, and one of the things that I've done is I've started a Facebook page and a database, because sometimes people don't want to be on Facebook, but the Facebook group, you have to request to be a member, and you have to be recovered for 2 years. And of course, there's no way I can prove it, but I'm using people's integrity now and saying you can join this group if you meet my definition of recovered, which is in the 8 Keys book, and it's in the Dieting Toter book, it's in the 100 Questions and Answers book. I just wrote it one day. I realized I have to write, if I say people can be recovered, what the heck do I mean?
Right.
So I wrote out this definition. But you have to meet that, and you have to say you've met it for 2 years. And so we have a community there where we're exchanging ideas. I just recently wrote guidelines for, if you are recovered, how to use self-disclosure in your practice, because nobody ever did that. Nobody ever did that. So I had the time, and I sat down and I wrote these guidelines that I think, and I'm getting feedback from people saying these are really useful, because what people would say is, oh, it has to be in the client's best interest. Okay, fine, but what does that mean, right?
Right.
So to break it up into details, I think there's 16 or 17 guidelines about here's what you do. For example, one of them is, after a general disclosure, I've had an eating disorder too, and I recovered, most people know, well, don't talk about specifics of your illness. Don't talk about how many laxatives you took or how low you got in weight. Don't bring up anything that can cause their eating disorder cells to go into competition, right? So that's a pretty easy one, and I think most people sort of get that one. But then there's other ones like, well, what do I bring up when? Well, you wait for the client. If the client's struggling with laxative abuse and says, I don't think I can reduce them, I won't have a bowel movement, and you have had that experience, then share, not how many laxatives you took or whatever, but share strategies that helped you to get out of it and strategies that helped you wean off. And there's quite a few. I won't go into them. But anyway, so there's all these guidelines that I think are helpful. And then the other thing is I decided to start training people. So this coaching thing, for example, there's the Carolyn Costin Institute that is, I decided there's so many people that want to have in the last 5 years or so opened up these eating disorder coaching businesses. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And I realized they've been around for chemical dependency. There's been sober coaches and life coaches around, but no eating disorder coaches. And I realized there's no place training them. So people could hang up a shingle and say, I'm an eating disorder coach, but there was nobody training them anywhere. There's no institute, no. So I knew some people who had gone to life coaching programs to get a life coaching certificate just so they could have something. But they didn't get any training in eating disorders. Some of them were therapists. Some of them were recovered people. So I decided I've certainly been training people for years because I trained all my therapists to eat with clients, to take them shopping, to take them to restaurants. All the therapists I've ever trained, I always had them do that, even though a lot of therapists don't do that, which I understand. So I think there's a place for recovered therapists, and I do think recovered people need training. Like I said way earlier in this podcast, I don't think just because you're recovered you could be a good treater. It's hard to treat people with eating disorders, and they're going to scrutinize your body, and they're going to scrutinize everything you eat, and you have to be way on top of your game to do it. But I think training people to do it, I think it's the way the field is going. I think coaching, and I think it can prevent people from having to go to treatment. I think it can be a transition when people get out of treatment. And I have therapists who are asking to take the course because, when you're in school to be a therapist, does it teach you how to go to a restaurant with a client? It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't. So I'm excited about that. So I hope recovered people who are listening will join the Facebook. It's Recovered. Oh my gosh.
Don't worry about it. I will link it in the show notes for everybody so they'll be able to just go to it directly, and then I'll make sure to hop on there and join that right away as well.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Good.
But I definitely think that it's a good idea. I would really highly recommend that if you are a professional and you want to learn how to work with eating disorders, that you seek out specialty supervision and consultation on that, because you do need additional training. Very nuanced field. And there are obviously a lot of great people out there like Carolyn who would be happy to train you. Also want to put in a plug for Anita Johnston does training as well. Or you can even reach out to me. I have a couple supervisees who do that as well. So, and if you just want recommendations, you can always email me and I will connect you with somebody who would be a good fit. So there's lots of things you can do to get more training in there.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I didn't even know you had supervisors who did that.
Yeah, it's been really fun. I feel so fortunate and blessed from having the podcast, but I've met really amazing people who want to work on their CEDS, and anybody who's looking to get their CEDS can reach out to somebody who already has it, and you can get your hours that way. So,
I do have that.
You do.
Supervisor, yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I always remind Anita of that too.
That.
I know. I'm like, Anita, you should do this.
Yeah.
So in wrapping up today, it's been so great to talk with you, Carolyn. Honestly, one of the great honors of my career. It's been lovely.
Oh, thank you so
Any
much.
final things you want to say? I will put all the links in there so people can get in touch with you through your website or find the Facebook group, all of that. I will take care of. Anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
Just thank you. Thank you for
you.
being in the field, and thank you for being able to be out there about being recovered. I think as I'm getting older, I think, I need these younglings to take over and stand up and speak out, So I really appreciate that you're doing this. And I wouldn't even know how to put together a podcast. So I appreciate that you do things like that and ask people like me to be on, So
well, it's obvious.
That's all. I think we covered.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you on, and thank you for teaching me how to be out and completely unashamed about my eating disorder. All right, take care,
Okay.
Carolyn. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Let's keep in touch. You can find all the information you need about the podcast at eatingdisorderrecoverypodcast.com, including full podcast episodes and links to all of our social media sites. You can join our Facebook group for the podcast by searching Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast on Facebook. This is a closed group for listeners of the podcast looking to connect, share resources, and get involved in a pro-recovery community. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or YouTube. Please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing. Talk to you next time on the Eating Disorder Recovery Podcast.